Assalamualaikum and a very good day to my lecturer Dr. Ng as well as my fellow TESL 1 classmates. I am Nurul Huda binti Roslan and I'm going to share with you about the gender differences, and these slides were prepared by my group, Nurliana as well as Siti Sarah. So when we talk about gender, there are two different genders that we know of, which is male and female. So when we talk about gender role, it always associates with the behavior, the patterns of behavior, attitudes, as well as expectations, which associated with particular sex, with being either male or female. And of course, their behavior, their expectations, their attitudes that they always portray in our current society is always greatly influenced by our social expectations and social norms. So that's why gender differences are related closely to the social role. And there are few elements that influence there are few elements that makes both boys and girls are different, which we know as the differences. The first is physical behaviors. Next, behaviors, styles of social interaction, academic motivations and performances, as well as choices that both genders decide or make. So these differences goes parallel with the gender stereotypes in our current society, and these stereotypes is the one that affect how both sexes behave at school and as well as in class. For the source of gender differences, we know that during our early childhood, both males and females, they are greatly influenced by their surroundings, who is their parents, where they grew up from, what they see and hear, as well as when they enter schools or any education institutions. They then interact with their peers and they see how their peers or their friends behave and portray their attitudes, and they tend to follow their peers, either between genders or across genders. And as well as the media is where they get the sources from, what they were depicted or shown with, be it either from printed or digital media. And teachers are not the primary cause, but sometimes teachers influence them by their responses to and choices made on behalf of the students. And there are three types of differences that I want to touch here, which is the first physical differences, and the second would be the social differences, as well as the academic expectations for both genders. So we're going to look at the physical differences in gender role. For boys and girls, during the first 2 or 3 years of elementary school, both genders develop gross motor skills at almost the same average. However, when they enter the elementary school and by the end of the elementary schools, there are several apparent differences that they developed for both genders. And the first we go to the girls, the female. Girls mature faster in adolescence, and they are more matured in decision making, and they also develop fine motor skills where they improve more on how to move, on how to coordinate their motor skills. For example, how to hold a pencil and how to hold the scissors, or how to write compared to boys. And they also develop verbal skills faster than boys. For example, reading non-verbal signs and tone of voice, as well as expressions. But however, for boys, they develop stronger physical abilities, and they took a longer period of time to mature. For example, in terms of affection maturity, as well as the decision making. They are also very impulsive. When we say in class, we notice that boys tend to they are relentless if they sit for a longer time. That's why they love to move around and like to mingle with people. They tend to walk, they tend to touch their friends, push their friends, because that is them. They are very impulsive and risk taker. That's why compared to girls, in physical activities, boys tend to involve more. And for example, uh, this is because they develop gross motor skills better compared to girl, and faster. For example, they tend to run jumps compared to girls. Girls are more quiet and disclose. And with puberty, boys also grow physically taller, as well as their physiques are also different compared to girls. And because of the expectations from the society, boys tend to involve in sports, as well as physical activities that they have in schools. And for the social differences in gender role, we know that just like I said earlier, the behaviors of both females and males are greatly influenced by the social and cultural norms, which then influence how they communicate with one another. And these differences between gender cultures influence the way that people of different genders communicate. These differences, they begin at childhood. As for boys, they often gravitate to larger groups where they tend to create larger circles of friends, and they form friendships with other male friends based on common interests. For example, shoulder-to-shoulder friendship communication, for example, like watching sports or playing video games. And boys avoid communicating weaknesses and vulnerability because um, they expect competition in their friendship, and they try to avoid not to expose their weaknesses. And for example, in a classroom, boys are more likely to speak up. So what they likely love to speak up, even if they don't know what are the content of the speech that they're producing. And when working on a project in a small co-ed group, they have a tendency to ignore girls' comments and contributions to the group. Just like how we see in our society that men prone to ignore girls' comments and men tend to ignore women's comments and contributions to any discussion that we have in our society. As for girls, sorry, when relaxing socially, girls are more likely to seek and maintain one or two close friends, and they tend to communicate more affection, share different feelings, and have more affection. They are more affectionate, and they have greater intimacy and confidence, and they give more priority to communication compared to boys, and they build friendship with other female friends based on mutual support. For example, face-to-face interactions, just like they always tend to share stories or share their secrets or backgrounds. This is because they likely love to communicate weaknesses and vulnerability, since that is why girls tend to settle for. That's why girls settle for sharing stories or secrets that they have, or sharing problems, compared to boys. They prefer not to have that. They prefer not to disclose their stories, and girls tend to value their friends for listening and communicating non-critically. Basically, girls are more feeling affectionate compared to. And for the academic and cognitive differences in gender, in terms of the attention paid, teachers interact with boys more often than girls by margin of 10 to 30%. This due to the greater assertiveness of boys, because boys speak up more frequent, and because of we teachers we notice that boys are prone to mischief. That is why we are forced to give more attention to boys compared to girls, because we want them to do the task at hand and not just playing around. In terms of the public and private talk, teachers have a tendency to talk to boys from a greater physical distance than when they talk to girls. This is due to general gender expectations. Our society, we expect that nurturing expression is more often on the girls compared to boys, and for boys, our society expect that we tend to nurture business-like surrounding to boys compared to girls. So that's why we give more publicity to boys compared to girls. Just like when teachers talk with a greater physical distance with boys, all the classroom can hear what the content of the conversation. Compared to girls, we tend to nurture expressing a feeling more on themselves. As for distributing praise and criticism, teachers sometimes distribute praise and criticism differently to boys and girls. For example, the first one is the praise. Teachers tend to praise boys more than girls for their right answers, and for the girls, teachers tend to praise them more in terms of their good and well behavior, regardless of its relevance to content or to the lesson at hand. As for the overlook, the teacher tends to overlook boys' wrong answer, which unintendedly give the impression that boys are more competent and their knowledge is more important compared to girls, because teachers tend to overlook girls' right answers, which also unintendedly make the girls seem less competent and their knowledge is less important. And teachers also overlook boys' good and well behavior, which imply that boys are more bad. And for the girls, teachers tend to look girls' misbehavior, which implies that girls are more good than they may really be. As for how this knowledge helps teachers, yes, it is very important for us teachers to know this, to learn about this knowledge of these gender differences, because it helps us in various ways. And the first is it creates an open school environment with books, toys, sport equipment, and musical instruments that cater to everybody. And by having these different approaches of different activities, it allows children to pick and choose what they would like to be in the classroom, in managing their interests and self-concept, since it is very essential for growth, confidence, and self-esteem. And it is very important for us teachers to help them to find their self-identity and develop their interests despite of their genders, and this would lead to their physical as well as their emotion growth and development. For example, we can have doll houses, animals, building bricks, and musical instruments as items in the activities that will broaden the learning space for the children. And try to avoid putting girls or boys into boxes in relation to what they can play with. Try to avoid that girls need to play only with these certain activities. Girls need only to play with dolls. Boys only need to play with bricks and so on. They can do whatever they want to do, and as long as that is what their interest is. And second is be aware of current gender bias. Sorry, it's number 2. Be aware of current gender bias. In general, teachers tend to praise girls' neatness of their girls' neatness as well as their good appearances, and boys are more likely to receive attributes based on effort and ability. And also, we tend to associate boys with the activities that relates to the calculation as well as science, and the lack of the lack of women in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, or career and technical education subjects can be directed in some cases by these patterns of universal behavior. By having these stereotypes and general perception towards boys and girls, we teachers can develop or conduct an activity that includes both genders, boys and girls, into the exploration of science and technology, engineering and math. Okay, we can include a few activities like games or any fun activities that relate this STEM concept with both genders, boys and girls. And that is why, as teachers, we should create the school, the classroom, as bias-free zone. And we should think about the children, boys and girls, should think about their own conduct. We should avoid grouping the children by their gender, and make sure all classroom rules apply to a multitude of sexes. For example, we can have equal booths, guest speakers, films on males and females to create wide exposure and to normalize this idea for themselves. There should not be any specifications of these particular materials are only for girls and this particular material is only for boys. They are free to choose. They should have the freedom to choose what materials which they like the most and which materials suit them the most, in order for them to self-explore themselves and develop their self-identity. And the last one is to teach the children, both genders, acceptance, because we know that we grow in different cultures and different there are so many differences in our life, not just culture. We have also different genders, different abilities, different conceptions, different perceptions towards the reality. So by having this different activities that suit both genders and both females and males, we can teach them to be open-minded and accepting of people from every background. And we also can motivate them to be aware of this bias, because towards the end of their life, they can develop their mental cognitive of differences that we have in our reality of our life. And when they grow up, they can deal and cope with this conflict and respond to intolerance in the real world. So this is very important for us teachers to inculcate the differences in our classroom activities. So that is why it is very important to us. In learning this knowledge of gender differences. So I guess that is all from me. Thank you.